United States, Atlanta. When a young black student is unfairly disciplined for a minor mistake, while white classmates go unpunished, it ignites a legal battle that exposes the racial bias deeply ingrained in the education system. Jaden Carter, a 14-year-old black student, has always been an excellent student, hard-working, respectful, and passionate about his studies. However, his teacher, Mr. Calloway, has a different perception of him. For years, Jaden has noticed that he and other black students are punished more harshly than their white classmates for the same behaviors. One day, Jaden forgets to bring his notebook to class. Mr. Calloway explodes with anger, publicly humiliating him and sending him to detention. Meanwhile, two white students who forgot their books receive nothing more than a warning. When Jaden tries to defend himself, the teacher escalates the situation, accusing him of being disrespectful and having a bad attitude. Jaden is suspended for a week. His parents, tired of watching their son be unfairly targeted, decide to take legal action. They file a lawsuit against the school, arguing that Jaden is a victim of racial discrimination. As the case gains traction, local media outlets begin covering Jaden's story, sparking conversations about racial disparities in school discipline. Some community members rally behind Jaden and his family, demanding accountability from the school district. Others, however, question whether racial bias played a role at all, dismissing the concerns as exaggerations. The school administration remains defensive, insisting that their disciplinary policies are fair and that Jaden's suspension was warranted. Mr. Calloway, in particular, refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing, maintaining that he was simply enforcing school rules. Jaden's parents refuse to back down, hiring a civil rights attorney who begins compiling evidence of disproportionate punishment toward black students in the district. Records reveal a troubling pattern. Black students are suspended at significantly higher rates than their white peers for similar infractions. Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly because of who they are? How did it make you feel? The courtroom is packed as Jaden and his parents take a stand against Mr. Calloway and the school district. Jaden sits nervously at the witness stand as the judge, an older white man, looks down at him. "Jaden, tell us what happened in class that day," he says. Jaden takes a deep breath. "I forgot my notebook, and Mr. Calloway yelled at me. He called me irresponsible and sent me to detention," he explains. "But two white students forgot their books too, and he just told them to bring it next time." The lawyer representing the school district smirks. "Jaden, isn't it true that you've had discipline issues before?" he asks, trying to paint Jaden as a troublemaker. Jaden shakes his head. "Number, I've never been in trouble before. But Mr. Calloway treats kids like me differently." Jaden's lawyer rises from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The school district is attempting to discredit a student who has a clean record. The facts of this case are clear." The judge nods. Sustained. Let's focus on the incident in question. Jaden's lawyer presents data showing that black students in the district are suspended at disproportionately higher rates than their white peers. Reports of similar incidents involving other black students who were unfairly disciplined are entered into evidence. The statistics paint a grim picture of systemic discrimination within the school. Jaden's parents watch anxiously as their lawyer builds the case, calling expert witnesses who testify about racial bias in school disciplinary actions. Educators, psychologists, and civil rights advocates take the stand, explaining how implicit bias affects students of color and limits their educational opportunities. The tension in the courtroom thickens. The judge leans forward, considering Jaden's words carefully. "How do you explain this, Mr. Calloway?" Jaden's lawyer asks. Mr. Calloway shifts uncomfortably in his seat. I treat all my students the same, he insists. I discipline based on behavior, not race. The lawyer doesn't back down. Then why do the records show that black students receive harsher punishments for the same actions? Mr. Calloway remains silent, his face flushed. The evidence speaks louder than his words. As closing arguments begin, Jaden's lawyer looks directly at the jury. This case isn't just about one student. It's about a system that punishes black children unfairly, that sees them as troublemakers instead of bright young minds. Jaden Carter deserves justice, not just for himself, but for every student who has been treated unfairly. The courtroom falls silent as the judge prepares to deliver his verdict. How do you think it feels to be accused of something just because of someone's perception of you? Jaden's lawyer presents disciplinary records that show a disturbing pattern. Black students in Mr. Calloway's class receive harsher punishments than white students for the same behaviors. Over the past 3 years, 85% of the detentions given by Mr. Calloway were to black students, the lawyer states. The courtroom murmurs in shock. The principal, forced to testify, looks uncomfortable. We never looked at the numbers that way, he admits. Mr. Calloway shifts in his seat, suddenly less confident. The weight of the evidence is undeniable. Mr. Calloway, do you have an explanation for this disparity? The lawyer presses. Mr. Calloway stammers but can't provide an answer. Jaden's mother watches with tears in her eyes. Finally, the truth is coming to light. As the lawyer continues, he presents testimony from other students who have faced similar treatment. A former student, now in college, takes the stand and recalls how Mr. Calloway constantly singled him out for punishment. It didn't matter if I did the same thing as my classmates. I always got the worst of it. The defense lawyer tries to deflect, arguing that Mr. Calloway's strict approach is meant to maintain discipline in the classroom. A teacher has a right to enforce rules, he insists. Discipline is necessary for learning. Jaden's lawyer doesn't back down. Discipline should be fair, she counters, and the numbers show that it has not been. She lays out more data from across the district, revealing a widespread pattern of racial disparities in punishment. The judge leans forward, clearly troubled by the evidence. These statistics are alarming, he says, addressing the school district's attorney. What steps has the school taken to ensure disciplinary fairness? The school district's attorney falters. We have policies in place, but those policies are failing. Jaden's lawyer interjects, and students like Jaden Carter are suffering the consequences. The room falls into silence as the weight of the case settles over the courtroom. The judge takes a deep breath before announcing that he will review the evidence carefully before rendering his decision. The tension in the courtroom remains high as the judge calls for a short recess. Jaden sits with his parents, gripping his mother's hand tightly. "It's almost over," she whispers, her voice trembling with emotion. Jaden nods, though his stomach churns with anxiety. During the recess, reporters and spectators discuss the overwhelming evidence. Some shake their heads in disbelief while others nod in agreement, acknowledging that these disparities are all too common in schools across the country. As the court reconvenes, Jaden's lawyer stands for the final argument. "This is not just about one teacher or one student," she says firmly. "This is about systemic injustice that has gone unchallenged for too long. It is time to demand change." The school district's attorney tries one last time to defend their policies, but the weight of the data, the testimonies, and the undeniable truth leaves little room for rebuttal. Jaden looks toward the judge, waiting for what comes next. "Do you think statistics and data can help prove injustice, even when people try to deny it?" After days of emotional testimony, the judge delivers his verdict. The courtroom holds its breath. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that racial bias influenced Mr. Calloway's disciplinary actions. The judge announces, "This court rules in favor of Jaden Carter and his family." The decision sends a wave of relief through Jaden and his parents. His mother clutches his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispers, "We did it, Jaden." The school district is ordered to pay damages and implement mandatory bias training for all staff members. Policies on discipline must be restructured to ensure fairness. The ruling mandates that every school in the district undergoes external audits to track and eliminate racial disparities in punishment. Mr. Calloway, now disgraced, is fired from his position. His legacy will forever be tied to his racist disciplinary practices. As he walks out of the courtroom, his face is red with humiliation. He avoids eye contact with Jaden, who watches him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The case makes headlines, sparking a nationwide discussion on racial bias in education. News outlets report on the systemic issues that Jaden's case has exposed. Civil rights leaders call for broader reforms, while former students come forward with similar stories of discrimination at schools across the country. At a press conference following the verdict, Jaden speaks to reporters. "I just wanted to be treated fairly," he says. "No kid should be punished more harshly just because of the color of their skin." His words resonate with many, fueling a larger movement demanding justice in education. In response to public pressure, other school districts begin reassessing their policies. Some introduce new training programs, while others revise their disciplinary codes to ensure fairness and transparency. Jaden's case becomes a landmark decision in the fight for racial equity in schools. Months later, Jaden returns to school, where he is met with newfound respect. Teachers and administrators, now more aware of their biases, handle discipline more fairly. His classmates, inspired by his courage, stand up for themselves in ways they never did before. Jaden's victory is not just for him, but for every student who has ever been unfairly targeted. His case becomes a lesson in the power of standing up against injustice, proving that change is possible when people refuse to stay silent. Do you think teachers should undergo training to recognize and eliminate their biases? Why or why not? Jaden becomes a symbol of student activism, inspiring other kids to stand up against racial discrimination in schools. His case does more than just bring justice for himself. It sparks a movement that pushes for systemic change. Shortly after the verdict, Jaden is invited to speak at a school board meeting where policies on racial bias are being discussed. Standing in front of a room full of educators and administrators, he shares his experience. "I never wanted to be in this position," he says. "I just wanted to be treated fairly, like every other student." His words resonate, and the board members nod in agreement. They begin implementing policies that require teachers to undergo racial bias training. New leadership is put in place, ensuring that educators are held accountable for their actions. The school district, now under national scrutiny, hires independent auditors to track disciplinary disparities. Reports reveal what Jaden's case made clear. Black students were punished at disproportionately higher rates than their white peers. With mounting pressure from civil rights organizations and parents, the district introduces a new code of conduct that standardizes discipline policies, making sure no student is unfairly targeted. Meanwhile, Jaden's story spreads beyond his own school. Media outlets cover his fight for justice, and soon he is receiving messages from students across the country who have faced similar treatment. He realizes that his struggle is part of a larger problem, and he feels a responsibility to keep fighting. He is invited to speak at educational conferences, sharing his experience and calling for justice. His once quiet voice is now amplified, and he stands in front of crowds filled with teachers, parents, and students who want to see change. "This isn't just about me," Jaden tells them. "This is about making sure no other black kid has to go through what I did." Support pours in from all corners. Civil rights organizations offer Jaden's family legal support and help advocate for broader educational reforms. Local activists organize rallies, demanding accountability from schools with high racial disparities in discipline. Despite the overwhelming support, Jaden also faces backlash. Some people criticize him, claiming he is making an issue out of nothing. Online comments question whether racism in schools is truly a problem. "Discipline is discipline," one comment reads. "If these kids just followed the rules, they wouldn't have these issues." Jaden doesn't let the negativity deter him. He knows that real change comes with resistance, and he refuses to be silenced. He continues attending meetings, working alongside school officials, and speaking out about racial disparities in education. His efforts lead to major victories. The state's Department of Education begins reviewing discipline policies across multiple districts. Other students come forward with their own stories, and more schools commit to reevaluating their practices. The pressure for change is no longer limited to Jaden's school. It becomes a national conversation. Months later, Jaden reflects on how far things have come. Sitting at his desk, back in class, he notices the difference. Teachers are more mindful of how they address students. Discipline is handled more fairly. Students who once feared speaking up now feel empowered to do so. Jaden, once seen as just another student, is now a young activist, changing the system for the better. His experience has shown him the power of standing up, and he vows to keep fighting. In a televised interview, a reporter asks him if he ever regretted taking legal action. Jaden shakes his head. "I didn't ask to be treated unfairly," he says. "But if I can make sure no other black kid goes through what I did, then it was worth the fight." His words leave an impact. His fight is not just his own. It is for every student who has ever felt unheard, every child who has been punished unfairly, and every family who has had to fight for justice. How can students and parents work together to ensure schools are fair for everyone? The impact of Jaden's case reaches beyond his city, prompting schools nationwide to examine their own disciplinary policies. Educators, policymakers, and parents begin to question the fairness of school discipline, realizing that implicit biases may have influenced decisions for years. School districts across the country launch independent investigations into their practices, determined to ensure that racial disparities in discipline no longer go unnoticed. As these investigations unfold, reports confirm what Jaden's case revealed. Black students and other students of color are disproportionately suspended and expelled compared to their white peers. With mounting evidence, new policies are enacted to address systemic bias. Schools begin implementing restorative justice programs, focusing on conflict resolution rather than punishment. Instead of immediate suspensions, teachers receive training on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity, creating an environment that fosters growth rather than alienation. More students come forward with their stories, proving that Jaden's experience was not isolated. It was part of a much larger problem. Inspired by Jaden's courage, students in different states challenge unfair disciplinary actions, leading to broader legal reforms. Civil rights organizations and advocacy groups use Jaden's case as a benchmark, pushing for policy changes that will benefit future generations. The national conversation grows. Legislators propose bills that require schools to collect and publish data on disciplinary actions by race, ensuring transparency and accountability. Colleges and universities take notice as well, adjusting their admissions policies to consider the impact of racial bias in high school disciplinary records. What started as Jaden's personal fight transforms into a national movement for equity in education. Years later, Jaden graduates from college with honors, dedicating his career to fighting educational inequality. He pursues a degree in law and education policy, determined to protect students from the discrimination he once faced. He works alongside policymakers, helping draft legislation aimed at reforming school discipline policies nationwide. His name becomes synonymous with justice and fairness in education, a symbol of what one person can accomplish when they refuse to accept injustice. Despite his success, Jaden never forgets where he started. He frequently returns to schools, speaking to students about their rights and encouraging them to challenge unfair treatment. If you see something wrong, don't stay silent, he tells them. Your voice has power. His story serves as a reminder that one voice, no matter how young, can spark change. Teachers who once ignored racial disparities in discipline now pay closer attention. School administrators who once dismissed student concerns now listen more carefully. Because of Jaden's fight, the next generation of students faces a more just and equitable education system. The lasting impact of Jaden's case is undeniable. Schools across the nation continue to refine their policies, ensuring that every student is treated fairly, regardless of their background. Jaden's work leads to scholarship opportunities, mentorship programs, and legal initiatives that help students facing similar challenges. Jaden's journey proves that true change is possible when individuals stand up against injustice. His fight was never just about himself. It was about ensuring a better future for all students. His legacy is a transformed education system that prioritizes fairness, accountability, and opportunity for every child. What changes do you think should happen in schools to make sure all students are treated fairly? Jaden stands before a crowd of students at a school rally, his heart pounding as he grips the microphone. The gymnasium is filled with young faces, some hopeful, some hesitant, and others carrying the weight of the same struggles he once faced. He takes a deep breath, determined to use his voice for those who feel unheard. If you ever feel like you're being treated unfairly, speak up, he says firmly. Your voice is powerful. A hush falls over the crowd as his words sink in. Then, the students erupt into applause, their energy shifting from uncertainty to empowerment. Many of them have experienced the same injustices Jaden fought against, but now they realize they don't have to suffer in silence. They have the right to demand fairness. They have the right to be heard. Jaden scans the crowd and notices a young girl in the front row wiping away tears. He recognizes the look on her face, the same look he once wore when he felt powerless. But today, she, like so many others in the room, is no longer alone. The rally continues with other speakers sharing their stories, students stepping forward to discuss their own experiences with bias and discrimination. Teachers and administrators, once resistant to change, listen with newfound awareness, acknowledging the responsibility they hold in ensuring an equitable learning environment. As the event draws to a close, Jaden is approached by a group of students who thank him for giving them the courage to stand up for themselves. "Because of you, I feel like I can finally tell my story," one of them says. Jaden smiles, humbled. It's not just my fight, it's all of ours. We have to keep pushing for change. Later that night, as he walks through the now empty school halls, he reflects on how far he has come. The scared boy who once sat in detention for something he didn't deserve is gone. In his place stands a leader, an activist, and a voice for the voiceless. He knows this is just the beginning. His fight wasn't just for himself. It was for every student who comes after him. Because of him, policies will change, biases will be challenged, and schools will be held accountable. As he steps outside, the cool night air fills his lungs. He smiles, knowing that he has made a difference. His struggle was not in vain. Creating a world where no student has to face discrimination is a responsibility shared by all. It starts with recognizing injustice, speaking out against it, and demanding change. Schools must implement policies that promote equity. Teachers must undergo training to eliminate biases, and students must continue to support one another. The fight for fairness in education is far from over, but Jaden's story proves that when people come together to challenge injustice, real change happens. His voice started a movement, and now it is up to others to carry it forward. What role do we all play in creating a world where no student faces discrimination? How can we ensure that fairness and justice are not just ideals, but everyday realities?